so great to have you here, Dr. Patrick, and thanks for making yourself available.
Thank you, Sam. It's a real pleasure to be with you. And I was, it was so exciting to be with, I don't know, 4,000 people, 4,500 people in that incredible stadium with you guys. It doesn't feel very long ago. And Sheila and I were just blown away to be with you, to catch a tremendous sense of excitement at all that's happening in the church in New Zealand. But it's great to be on this call. And we have already, I can see 332 in the Zoom call. We have an unknown number of people already watching live on YouTube. The numbers are climbing fast. So we need to get down to it.
Wonderful. Again, thank you so much again, Dr. Patrick. And I'll just echo what Pastor Sam said. The Shout Forum we did a couple of years ago was amazing. And do want to big thanks to Ravi for helping to connect some of the dots tonight. So thank you, Ravi, so much. It's a privilege to be able to have your connections here as well. With Dr. Patrick. And so we do want to get started, and our time is of the essence. So I guess for those, there would have been some of us, Patrick, that would have been in the session a couple of years ago that have probably heard a bit from you. But I'd love you to give a really solid introduction about what you do around the world of Futurist is I guess for me, a fairly vague term in terms of I don't know quite what that means. So can you just help us to articulate what it is that you actually do and really who you are, who you're married to, how many kids you have, and I'd love to have a good introduction from you.
Just like that. Okay, fine. Okay. All right. So Sheila's nearby. We've been married for 41 years now. We have 4 grown-up children and 7 grandchildren, which makes us feel older than we feel ourselves. In terms of what I do in my job, I work with very large companies, mainly around, it's a group of around 400 of the largest 2,000 companies in the world, often at board level, often sharing platforms with their CEOs at their most important client events globally. And of course, that's all gone virtual. So, yesterday I was doing something similar to that into 15 countries from our home, and I'll be doing that again next week. But that's what I do. I work with very large companies, helping them to make sense of all the media noise about the future, helping them to understand their industry, their region, their customers, their strategy, their technologies, and where they might be going for the future. And I've been doing that since the mid to late 1990s. It happened as a result of books like FutureWise and The Future of Almost Everything, which incidentally, in both of those, I predicted new pandemics like coronavirus, which we'll come on to in a moment. So now, one of the reasons why things like coronavirus have been particularly on my radar screen is because of my previous role. I'm a real doctor. I had a medical training in the UK, and I specialized in the care of people dying of cancer, helping to look after them in their own homes, which is a deeply spiritual thing, actually. It's not just a physical thing. It was as a doctor doing that when I was about 30 years old that a new illness came knocking on my door that felt like Ebola. It was so scary. No one really wanted to be involved. People were afraid to touch. They were just terrified. They, didn't even want to go in the same ward. And this illness wasn't Ebola. It just felt like Ebola, but it was causing massive emotional reactions. And in 1987, that illness was AIDS caused by another mutant virus, like coronavirus, which had jumped from animals into humans and mutated at the same time. And that particular virus that started to hit my medical practice, looking after people who are dying in London, that particular virus has now killed 45 million people. So you can see that since the age of 30, I've been acutely aware of how easily a virus can jump and how it can cause devastation. And HIV, we still have no vaccine 32 years later. We still have no really effective cures. Yes, we have lots of drugs people can take for life, but we don't have something that cures you as well as, say, if you've got a pneumonia from a bacteria. We don't have something we can give someone for 3 weeks and they're cured. So we're in still a very difficult situation with HIV. Anyway, my wife and I, we having seen that people with HIV were being treated as if they had leprosy, and there was this huge fear. Even doctors and nurses weren't doing what they should be doing. We started to train volunteers in our own home and around our area in London from local churches, like the church we belong to, to go into homes and do what doctors and nurses and social workers weren't doing, and just do practical stuff, washing, cooking, cleaning, collecting the prescription, whatever it took to allow someone to die at home with dignity and self-respect who had AIDS. So this was a bolt-on to my cancer work. And so that organization grew and went viral itself. It was called Asset AIDS Care Education and Training. And today we are in 15 countries, mainly the poorest parts of the world. So it's people like Uganda, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Congo, India, Thailand, Belarus, Ukraine, but also in the UK and Ireland, helping people to cope with the consequences of becoming infected, but most importantly, to help save lives and teach young people how to live in a healthy way where they don't feel under pressure to take risks, not just with HIV, but many other sexual risks, risks from drugs, risks of unwanted pregnancy, and a whole host of other things. So that's been a church-based mission, a church-based expression of local life, and as I say, has touched projects, programs, and churches in maybe 100 nations, but we have our own programs in about 15 of them. So that all happened because of a book I wrote called The Truth About AIDS, which I wrote in 1987. And I felt, after seeing how a book could, by accident, start a global movement, I felt that I should continue to write. So I continue to write books on genetics, on drugs, politics, integrity in public life, cyber, you name it. I was writing about a book a year, I guess. And it was as a result of that, really, in the mid-1990s, that companies started to ask me to advise them on their own strategy. And that continued through the dot-com boom. And then after 9/11, it became more generic in terms of a much wider range of global trends. So that's my background. That's what I do. But right now, every corporation in the world only wants to know one thing: what's happening next with COVID? What's life after COVID-19? And how do we be ready for it?
So that's quite a background, and thank you for sharing that. Are you going to write a book about the truth about coronavirus? Is that the next title for your next book?
Well, I sort of wrote it already. It's part of the Future of Almost Everything, which I wrote 3 years ago, and I updated it again last year. And incidentally, if you want to read it, if there is people want to read it, it's available for free. You can download the whole thing as an audiobook, The Future of Almost Everything. It's on Amazon, and it's me. I've spoken the whole book for you onto in a studio, and so you can hear me speaking what I've been talking about to all these companies. It's completely free. The only catch is that Audible want you to subscribe. If you subscribe, you have to give them their credit card details, but you get a month for free. Download my book and you get another one as well for free, and then cancel the subscription after 24 hours and you can keep my book forever. How cool is that? So there you are. But maybe I'll write another book about COVID. We'll see. But there's certainly a lot happening at the moment, and I've got a few slides which I'd love to share with you before we sort of go into a Q&A.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. It'd be great to have a conversation around. So I guess narrowing that down into COVID. So you've obviously, I guess from that background, are not super surprised, I suppose, about where we're at. Maybe some of us are, but perhaps you can have a conversation about COVID-19 now. What are you seeing, I guess, globally? And then we'll start to sort of hone it down, maybe by the industry vertical and that. But give us a state of the nation at the moment.
All right. So if that's okay, I'm going to share some slides. And I'd say that to those of you who are listening, please feel free to keep that chat screen running. And I may respond to some of them as we go, but we're certainly going to have an opportunity to do that. And this call's running for an hour, but I'm going to hang around for coffee for another more or less hour after that. So as long as there's people on the call, we'll carry on the conversation. So let's see if this works. And I hope you can see this slide. Is that okay? Can you see that, Sam, Jake?
Yep, that's good. Yep, perfect.
Right. Okay. So this is the virus, and I think most people don't realize that you can't kill a virus. Okay, you can't kill it. This is the ultimate nanotech robot. It's not living. It doesn't breathe. It doesn't use electricity. It doesn't use up food or resources. It's just a bag of protein in red, with a fatty layer on the outside, and inside it is a tiny, tiny scrap of genetic code. That's the language of you. If you look at all the books behind me here, if I was to string all the words of those together, that would be about 1% of your genetic code. That's the instructions that make you special and unique. It makes you different from a pig, and it makes you different from your brother or your sister. Okay, that's your genes. Well, there's a tiny fragment of genes and it's equivalent to about one phrase, okay, in one of those books. It's a tiny fragment, but it's lethal, because that fragment, if it gets inside one of your cells, it hijacks the brain of the cell and tells the brain of that cell to stop being a skin cell or a throat cell or whatever, and instead to become a virus factory. And not only that, but it's got things on the outside. So there's pink things. The pink things are really important. These are looking for the right cell to lock onto. You see, every cell in your body has got little holes in the outside membrane. And so the virus is constantly bumping up against cells. If someone sneezes at you, every one of the cells inside the skin of the nose or your eye or your mouth is being bombarded with these funny viruses. And they're just trying to lock on. But it's very specific. So a virus with those pink things, they'll be shaped for a throat cell of a human being, but it might also work in a bat, but it wouldn't work in a pig. It won't work for a liver cell in a human being. It's very, very specific. And what happens is when it latches on, it's like a great big magnet. Yum. And suddenly, imagine two bubbles in a bubble bath, a big bubble and a little bubble. The big bubble is one of your cells. The little bubble is the virus. And suddenly, whoop, it becomes one. The virus has disappeared. It's just injected its genetic code, that white thing, inside the cell. And from that moment, it's curtains. That cell is reprogrammed, hijacked, and turned into a virus factory. And what's more, that person then becomes a walking bio weapons factory, ready to attack inadvertently the rest of humankind. This is the most terrible thing about this virus. Now, we've had 3.1 million cases confirmed, but that's absolutely nothing compared to the reality. It's just the ones we've tested. We've seen around a third of those recover, but look at the US. It's by far and away the worst affected country. New Zealand, in comparison, you've wiped it out. We'll come back to New Zealand in a moment, but it's all to do with crowd control, preventing people who've been turned into bioweapons factories by this virus from inadvertently spreading their virus load to others. Now, the most important thing to understand in New Zealand today is what we call doubling time. It's how long it takes for cases to double from what they've been in the past. So what does that mean? Well, how long to go from one case to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32? And the fact is that in countries without lockdown, it takes usually about 4 to 5 days. In London, we had a doubling time of only 2 days. What does that mean? Well, if you go in 20 doublings, 2, 4, 8, 16, it's staggering. You go from one person to 1 million people, 20 doublings. So in London, we were looking like we would go from one infected person to 1 million infected people in that single city alone in just, 20 doublings. That's 40 days. That's just over a month. So you can see why it is that people have been worried about this illness. And you say, okay, we'll go into lockdown. Maybe we can extend the doubling to 10 days. You say, hallelujah. But you know what? 10 days, 20 doublings, 10 days. What does that mean? It's in 200 days. You still get there in the end. It just means it takes you 6 months instead of 3 months or something like that. So you have to take a very big view of this thing, because if you've got 1,000 cases in a country, and New Zealand has had 1,000 cases, then you get to 1 billion cases worldwide just from 1,000, unless there's something like SEAL around you to stop it spreading. Okay, so that's why we have to take this thing seriously. So what happens next? Here are 3 countries on 3 graphs laid on top of each other. Time 0 is the day when each country had 150 cases. And you can see South Africa looks relatively flat, if you believe that. Italy, one of the worst affected countries of the world, actually flattening off. But look at the US, completely out of control. Now, as I warned in my book before, we have...
It's because mainly the country.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So did you want to say something? I just come back to this shared screen again. One of the challenges is that new viruses are emerging roughly every few weeks. So can you see that okay?
Yeah, that's good.
Are you seeing that okay? And me as well? So new viruses emerging roughly every 12 months. So we saw SARS, 10% mortality rate, 2003. Bird flu, 60% mortality rate. MERS, 34% mortality rate. These things tend to die out because they're so dangerous that most people die before they can spread it on. But when you talk about swine flu, you see in 2009, only 0.02%. Now, half of the world's children got infected with swine flu in 24 months, a quarter of the world's adults. So you see these viruses, they can go fast. And COVID-19 can certainly go very fast with a 1 to 2% or maybe a bit less mortality rate. Now, these things are mutating. So coronavirus, we already have 30 different strains. Some of those strains are producing 270 times the level when people have a cough than others. The highest and most dangerous strains, highest virus level strains are in Italy and Spain, the lowest in the US at the moment. The other challenge is we don't know if you get infected with one of these strains, it will make you immune against all the others. We don't know if you get infected with one of the strains, whether the same strain could hit you again next year. We're worried about it because many coronaviruses do not produce long-term immunity. Now you can see why it is that people are starting to talk about war. They're using the language of global war. And if you understand that, you will be able to predict what's going to happen next in government policy. What it means is, think about the Second World War and what nations did to mobilize in hard affected countries, and then you will understand how nations will respond. And they'll all get there in the end. I don't care what President Trump tweets or doesn't tweet tomorrow morning. He too will get there in the end. War effort means we fight our enemy on every front globally. We mobilize entire nations. We protect the most vulnerable. We take good care of casualties. We maintain morale and community life. We get people back to work and to normal life as fast as we possibly can, taking into account all those things above, because otherwise we're defeated and we are confident in victory. That is the strategy that will be adopted by every single government. Now, the truth is that what happens in New Zealand and Europe and Australia and America is completely irrelevant to the global future of coronavirus. Why? Almost completely irrelevant, because 85% of humanity lives not in those places, but in emerging markets. So you need to think about countries like Uganda, Nigeria, Tanzania, the Philippines. China is sort of somewhere between developed and emerging. But if you think about people living in mud huts in Zaire, for example, Zambia, wherever, Zimbabwe, these people, whatever the government tries, are not going to be able to prevent COVID-19 spreading rapidly amongst them, just like I showed you. And that means that in those kinds of nations, we will see recovery from COVID much more quickly than in other nations. We will see a country like Uganda see a rapid sweep of the virus through its population. They will go back to normal much more quickly, while the UK is still in lockdown. You can see it in the statistics. And because the population is young, on the whole, the impact will be proportionately less than on an aging society like Italy or Germany. Young people are more or less immune. Children seem to be almost unscathed by this. And it's only people with thick medical records that are really likely to die. But there aren't many of them in Uganda. Most of them have died at a young age because you don't survive if you have diabetes and multiple heart problems and rheumatic illnesses and had a stroke, and it just doesn't happen. Now, on this slide here, 25% of people don't get any symptoms at all, so they're impossible to track. And that's going to be a problem for New Zealand going forward as you start to open your borders again. And what's more, they can pass the infection to another group of people. Again, 25% of them have no symptoms at all. 50% have only mild symptoms, but the other 25%, it's major. People sweating at home, having real problems, wondering if they're going to need to go to hospital, and 10% of them will go to hospital. And of those, around half will end up on ventilators, and of those on ventilators, around half will die. So it's a really serious problem. Now, we need to look at the strategies, and we can look at what New Zealand has done so successfully, which is to lock society down, stop traffic coming in, put people coming into the country in quarantine, testing, contact tracing, isolation, very effective. And also at the same time, ramping up healthcare, developing better supportive treatments, testing, and we will then move to testing people for past infection, hoping to release people into the community that we think are relatively immune. and hoping to get a vaccine. But, you know, for Ebola, it's taken us 5 years to get a vaccine. HIV, we've tried for 32 years and not made it. We don't know when vaccine will come, and we don't know how effective it will be. So we need some other strategies. But in the meantime, we're seeing countries already easing lockdown. New Zealand, that sounds like a good strategy. You've got very low cases, you've got very strong data, you've got a very good system of contact tracing, and we can now relax a little, do it gradually, and hopefully manage the process until we land up with better treatments or a vaccine. And hopefully you won't have the same kind of problems that Italy has had ever. Then we've got mid-range countries with good data, who are, some of them beginning to open up again, and need to be careful. The UK is in this example because they may well see a second spike, which could well coincide with annual flu. So we need to be very careful with mid-range countries. Then we've got countries with high numbers, with poor data, partly because the spread is happening so fast. And I include African countries, many of them, and the United States, shockingly, because the US doesn't have an integrated health policy because there's so many different states and they're at war with the White House. So what's the answer? The answer is we need to reverse 80 years of neglect. You see, 80 years ago, we developed antibiotics. Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin in the 1940s. But today we still have no drug which is as effective against any virus in the world as penicillin was against bacteria. So we need drugs that are like penicillin to block the cell surface receptors of the virus, to stop it binding, to block gene translation, to stop the virus from injecting its instructions into the heart of the cell, the brain, to block the virus from manufacturing and to block release. Will we have these? Yes, we will. I think we will probably find that within the next 12 weeks, we're beginning to find some drugs that have some effect on one or two of those. But despite all of this carnage, most global trends are continuing, just as I described in my book, Future-Wise and the Future of Almost Everything. And coronavirus will come, it will go. We will see life after coronavirus. And you know, things like the rise of Asia, the rise of China, emerging markets, the fall of technology costs, the aging of developed nations, the rise of big data, Internet of Things, robotics, all of these things will continue. But what COVID is doing is it's accelerating some of these things. So let's take healthcare. We've had, FaceTime and things like this for years. But when did you last see your doctor using a video? Crazy, isn't it? I'm fed up of going to see a doctor in a hospital to be told my tests are normal. Let's just do it by video. So you're seeing an acceleration of existing trends. The same with retail. Shopping malls that maybe would have closed in 5 years will now close next year because of an even faster shift from physical retail to online. Now, people say to me, and then I'm going to open up for questions, but people say to me, what about, Christians actually? They say to me, they have this conspiracy theory that this is all to do with an apocalyptic judgment of God, and that this is all to do with what's in the Bible and Jesus is coming back next Tuesday. Well, all I'd say is I'm looking out of my window here at a port and watching ships coming in and out of the port. It's a mile from my home here. And in that port, in 1348 in June, bubonic plague arrived in the UK and wiped out, we think, half of the entire population. So plague is nothing new. We've had these things every few hundred years. There's nothing new about this. I just want to make a comment. I think I'll come onto this later, actually, about what I've been thinking about the work of Paul, the Apostle Paul, as the world's first virtual apostle, the first virtual discipler, and how it was that his ministry was actually energized by an extraordinary event. I think we'll go back to the main call first, just to do with anything to do with COVID.
So, wow, that's a huge amount to follow up on. That's quite a good understanding, I guess, of the certainly the health impacts and the why. It probably answers a lot of the questions, to be honest, the very clever questions that we had as well, Patrick, because I guess our government has taken that sort of go hard and go early stance. We've closed our borders pretty rapidly. We've obviously, and there's going to be a whole bunch of questions. And I guess there's an interesting point here where There's some really interesting articles at the moment that are talking about in a few months' time, when things go back to some sense of normality, people are going to be asking the question, oh, did we overreact? Was it as bad as we intended? Now we're all suffering potentially financially. Some of us have lost our jobs and hours and things like that. And so there's a real interesting comment around, in your argument, it sounds like that was exactly the right thing to do, was to go hard, go early, so that we don't have some of these continuous lockdowns, I guess, and level 4 lockdowns further down the track.
Yeah, the New Zealand government did entirely the right thing. Many countries were saying, oh, be politically quite sensitive to stop the airlines. They did it. They all got there in the end. As I say, everyone gets there in the end, which is a declaration of war. It's just New Zealand declared war a little earlier. Okay, you saw the first missiles come over, and you thought that's pretty aggressive. Then you saw some more missiles coming, and you think, hey, that's war. We're at war. Okay, so lockdown. That means no one coming in. Flight stop. You guys went for it. Whereas people in other countries and think, oh, these missiles coming in. Oh, bang! A whole load of people have died. Oh, well, there probably won't be too many more missiles. Then a whole load more come. Oh, then they declared war. President Trump still thinks it's peace. It's just very strange, we will get there in the end. And I see George Tyler has said, I see we'll have a split between countries who have eliminated it and those who've been through it already and won't be able to intermingle. Look, no country's going to eliminate this. Okay, coronavirus will be with us for the next 100 years, I think, unless we have comprehensive vaccines to get rid of it. That's what happens to viruses. You see, you can think you've eliminated it when 70% or 80% of your population have developed some immunity. That assumes the immunity is permanent, by the way, and we don't know if it is. But even if we're right, you haven't, right? Because you've still got 30% of your population. So that means that from time to time you have an outbreak in the school or in an old people's home or something like that. You will continue to see clusters of infection, and you will continue to see. Humanly speaking, unless there's a comprehensive global vaccine that works, you will continue to see small outbreaks of coronavirus in New Zealand, and every medical student will be taught about it.
Wow. So it sounds like, okay, so we're now going to be living with this for an extended period of time. So then what about a comment on, and I guess thinking about some of your books, what about a comment on sort of innovation? How do we now maybe change mindsets and think about, if this is with us now for the best part of our lifetimes now, how do we think about innovation at a time like this in terms of different industry sectors? And what's a comment on that?
Well, we've already seen a gigantic amount of innovation. Actually, it's astonishing what's been happening and the speed of it, considering we've only declared war on coronavirus. I mean, in New Zealand, it happened, 20th of March? What's the date today? 28th of April. I mean, get a life. Let's not beat ourselves up too much. This is astonishing. Never in the whole history of the world has so much mobilization happened so fast, of so many billions of people towards a common cause to declare war on a particular thing and to do something about it. It's absolutely amazing how this has united the world. And so let's think of some examples of innovation. I mentioned virtual healthcare. Dramatic improvement in healthcare generally in terms of access to physicians, because they've doing the obvious thing is talking to people using the phone. I mean, it's kind of not exactly sensationally innovative, but the fact is it's taken COVID-19 to get the health service to do what it should have been doing 20 years ago. Let's think about innovations like this. Here we are, we're on a conference which has burnt up no carbon. Some electricity on the web, I grant you, because 5% of all global emissions are to do with the web now, okay? 5% of all electrical power emissions are to do with the web. But actually, it's much less than if we'd all got in a car to come to another of your amazing shout events. Or heaven forbid, if I got on a plane to go down to New Zealand, and my carbon alone, that single trip, would have used more carbon than all the cars coming around the city to a shout event. So we are innovating. We are discovering that we can do amazing things. Factories are discovering actually that they can manage their factories at home. We call it Industry 4.0. That systems can be designed to repair themselves without a human being going in. We have the technology to do these things. We've just been fairly lazy about investing in them. So I think it's happening in church life as well. I'm amazed. I belong to a church here in the UK, and we have a congregation of 100. So we know that when we have 60 within a week, by the way, the very first Sunday, we were streaming services to our congregation. What was really interesting is how many were there. So we had 60 on a watching live on YouTube. Well, there's only 100 in the congregation, and when you count that some are watching with 4 people in their house, some as a couples, we worked out we had 100 there. But we had 270 people, 270 views very rapidly. Who on earth are all these people? I don't know. But of the 58,000 churches that were streaming their own services just last Sunday, those churches have seen congregations collectively between them 4, 5, 6, or 7 times their normal amount. Who on earth are these people? I tell you, many of them are nothing to do with the church at all. They're just bored, stiff at home, and they're looking for something that's interesting. So innovation is happening in terms of messaging. It's not just by the church in terms of its own messaging, but companies are doing the same. Innovation in terms of advertising. Advertising that just shouts at people and tries to pressure people to buy things they don't want at a price they can't afford, or rather they don't need at a price they can't afford. That sort of thing has disappeared with COVID. Have you noticed? It's been replaced by public service announcements, like the bank says, "We are here for you. We're standing with you. By the way, keep isolated." People are explaining how to do things well, how to help you in your life, information you didn't know. This is the new advertising. It's information and revelation, just-in-time stuff that helps you to navigate your own life, takes you on your own journey in a better way. So all kinds of innovations are happening. It's very exciting and very, very positive, and it's good for the environment too.
So what about the global economy then? Because again, I mean, there's lots you can read on this, I guess, and there's a fair bit of doom and gloom, and some articles I've read are saying, for example, the New Zealand economy, it's going to take about 3 years for us to get back to the GDP levels that we were pre-COVID. With what you're saying, there sounds like there's a tinge of optimism there because of this innovation, because of this reinvention. How I guess, optimistic, pessimistic, bearish, bullish are you in terms of the global economy over the next kind of?
Well, the global economy will spring back, just as I'm not an apocalyptic futurist, and I have to say my predictions have usually been right. Life expectancy of futurists is very short. You know why? Their awful predictions catch up with them. But I've been doing this for 30 years now, so let me just tell you what I think is going to happen. And people are asking about FutureWise and the 6 faces of the future. I'll come back to that when I worked in 1998. Listen. I said when the global downturn happened, people called it global crash, economic apocalypse in 2008-9. I said, yep, okay, but we will soldier on, and we did. Do you know the global economy only stopped growing for 3 months? Only 3 months. See what? Yeah, you see, we have a reality, a version of reality, which is informed by CNN, Fox News, whatever you're watching. And I say this, watching too much TV news can make you physically sick. Okay, I'm a physician. Listen to me. Okay, you need to focus on the reality. What's the reality? What did I say? I said 85% of the world lives in emerging markets, folks. Almost all the growth of the global economy is happening in emerging markets. You know that because it's all on your doorstep. You are surrounded by this story, but people in Europe are completely blinded to it. They think that Europe is the center of the world. It isn't. Europe is almost irrelevant to the global economy and becoming increasingly so. So the global economy has motored on. It actually grew in a little bit in the years in each of those years of the so-called global economic crash. It wasn't a global economic crash, and actually it's the same now. Here's a couple of things to think about. So one of our own children works for one of the largest software companies in the world. His world hasn't changed at all. He's permanently homeworked. He doesn't have an office. He hasn't had an office since the day he started at that company. His world is completely unchanged, apart from homeschooling children. Okay. In fact, anyone that's in services who uses their brain, their world is relatively unchanged. For those who are making things, you think, oh yes, but the world's factories have been closed down. It's terrible, Patrick. Say, really? Yes, it was right to close everything down just to get control of the chaos and to be able to wait 12 21 days. Just pause for 21 days so we can see what infection there is in the community, because it will surface itself as people get sick. And then wait another week just to see if there's a wave to the others in their households. Pause for breath, yes. Close the factories, yes, if you have to. But you can't do that forever, and you don't need to. I love walking around factories, but I never see any people. There aren't people in factories these days. There are a few. I mean, I went to watch my own book being printed, The Future of Almost Everything. What fun it was to see these books thundering off the printing press. Dump, 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 dump. So exciting to pick it up and feel it literally hot, glued hot as it poured out of the press. But there was about one person every 100 meters because the big machines roll, they rush through, and the conveyor belt, they're packed and spread and bang, and whoop, whoop, here's the big box. And then someone comes along with a forklift truck, lifts it up and takes it 3/4 of a mile down a warehouse and plonks it in a pile and comes back again for the next one. You can run factories without having to kill everyone with COVID. Honestly, we just need to have a sense of perspective about this. So most factories can go back to work relatively easily, actually. And most people who work in offices should jolly well be able to learn to work virtually if they have to. And they can go back to work if they're reasonably careful. I'll tell you the trouble is this kind of irresistible compulsion to touch each other and to nose up really close. We love doing it. So outside my house, we live here up by the sea now, and outside my house there's a beach hut that sells ice creams and coffee. And I have a problem with that beach hut. I love the owner to pieces. I think he's doing a fantastic job. I love buying his ice cream. But the trouble is, the moment he opens, people gather. They start sitting around the beach hut. They'll sit on the beach, sit on the gravel, and before you know where you are, there's a street party going on, all eating ice cream together and coffee. I said, why can't you just take your ice cream and go away? But there's this irresistible attraction. So what happens? The government has to say, because you can't behave, there's nothing wrong with going to get an ice cream. You're not going to kill everybody with coronavirus by collecting an ice cream. But because you just can't behave, I'm afraid we're going to have to close it. So if we can find a way to behave properly, safely, looking after each other, and particularly protecting the most vulnerable, then we can go back to normal much more quickly in some respects than many might fear.
So with that, because I've got a question around the trade-offs between economics and health. And I guess it sort of borders on this utilitarianism kind of, there's a lot of articles around sacrificing a portion of the population. I suppose in the States, you're seeing certain states saying, let us free, we want to trade again. And then of course they're cornered by, if they do start trading and people start gathering, as you've mentioned, people get sick and the most vulnerable get sick, but yet the economy is starting to flourish again. And it's a really interesting, and I guess even for us in terms of within a faith community, a moral, we have a moral side to us, and we want to make sure that we're making the right decisions. How does that kind of trade-off work in your mind, I guess?
Okay, well, as I've said, there is a school of thought that says, look, let's assume that if you get coronavirus, you're protected from it for at least quite a long time, hopefully forever. If that's the case, and if it's also the case that for 80% of people, they're going to be fine. They're not going to go into hospital. And for the 10% that do, with good treatment, most of them will still be fine. And if we can segregate the population to people who are very vulnerable with thick medical records and really isolate them very well, and if it's true that children are more or less immune to this, that is, if they get it, they're not dying, they're not getting sick, then you could say, well, look, let's take a more pragmatic approach and say, look, with every other virus, you can't sort of, it's like watching the tide come in. I'm watching the tide come in at the moment. You can't just sort of say to the tide, oh, stay out. The tide will come in. So you have to allow the tide to come in, but you manage it. So you reduce the risk of flooding if you've got a massive storm coming in, right? So you do the same with coronavirus. If there's a coronavirus tide, and by the way, you see, you can manage your own coronavirus tide inside your country, but what happens to everybody else? I mean, if it's out of control in most of your neighboring countries and in places like the UK and Switzerland, what are you going to do? You're going to say no one can ever travel to these countries again? So we have to have a sort of kind of grown-up view of this. And that sort of view says, okay, We build capacity. I said, didn't I, wartime economy? I said, we put people into air raid shelters when the missiles are flying. We deal with those who are immediately injured. And then actually when the air raid's over, we find ways to get out. That you can't close every market, you can't close every factory, you have to go back to work. It's an act of courage. And in wartime, you'd say that. You say it's an act of courage, it's a declaration of will. We will not be intimidated by the enemy. We will go back to work. Let me tell you that in the UK, we've had many terrorist attacks. There was one terrible one which wiped out lots of people on a bus and on the metro. And I can tell you that my daughter missed that bum by 5 minutes. But the following morning, she went straight back on the metro and she went to work. And people thought she was mad. My American friends said, hey, are you going to move out of London? London's kind of dangerous. I said, what? They didn't understand anything about the British spirit, which is the life must go on. To do anything else is to yield to the enemy. So my daughter went to work as an act of defiance, as a deliberate act of courage, not knowing if she would be blown up tomorrow. And that is the spirit in which our world will go back to work, is to say we're going to do our best to stay safe. But we're going to take risks if we have to keep this nation going and to keep the world turning. We will not be subdued into some kind of cowering morass of chaotic destruction. We will win this battle. We'll do it sensibly, we'll do it carefully, we'll do it supporting those who every day work with courage and compassion in our hospitals. And we will also be careful to protect them. What that meant in the UK is to say, we promise that we will not allow lockdown to be eased if we have medical colleagues saying to us that they are not ready yet to receive the next wave. And that means, so in the UK, we've built a 4,000 bedded hospital in 10 days. As a British Army, we're good at that. Trouble is the British people are useless at sewing cloth, okay? So we don't know how to make clothes. So we've run out of gowns, okay? So we need to allow the gown makers to catch up and the visor makers to catch up and the ventilator makers to catch up. And when the medical professions say, we have capacity, we're ready. Do you know what's going to happen? We'll come out of lockdown. Why? Because the government will be almost saying, listen, folks, we're ready for you. Go and get sick. Go back to work. Not all at once, but we're ready for you. You all need to walk through this tunnel. It's an act of courage, and we're here to support you. The tunnel is actually being exposed to COVID. And we're going to help you in that process to get back to your daily life so you don't live in fear of this thing for the rest of this century, okay? And that's why we're doing what we're doing. Now, these are really, really big things. And of course, you pray at the same time that as you win time, for every week that goes by while people have been in lockdown, the medical experts around the world are discovering amazing things about this virus. They're discovering weaknesses in what the virus does. They're discovering tricks that the body can use to fight it. They're discovering people who are naturally immune that we can learn from. We're discovering people that have recovered, that have got antibodies. So it's absolutely right. Slow down, take care of our health service, build capacity, and then gradually get people back to work. Sorry, it's a long answer, but hopefully.
No, it's a good answer too. It's a good answer. I do want to have one more comment just around the health sector, which I know that we've talked about prior to the call. Just around, I guess a comment around mental health. You know, we've all been isolated in our bubbles for, I think we just, sort of in our 5th week. We've got possibly a couple more weeks of that as well. Yeah, can you just comment on mental health? Is a pretty major issue in New Zealand, as I'm sure it is around the world as well. But can you make a comment on mental health and I guess where you see that at this stage as well?
Yeah. Mental health is shockingly common, mental health issues. And I'm pleased that these things are being talked about more because it's been a stigma. It's been as much a stigma as HIV and AIDS, especially for guys in some countries. It depends on the countries. In some countries, like mine, it's much more difficult for a guy socially to say that they are suffering from clinical depression, for example. We are programmed as social creatures. It's in our genetic code that we associate, and out of those physical relationships come children, families. So if we weren't social creatures, actually we would die out. So we're programmed to exist in families, clans, tribes, groups. That's the human nature. That's our basic design. When you take that away from people, it causes suffering in almost everyone, unless they're extreme introverts, in which case they have a season of creativity and rejoicing, and they'll go and write books and plays and concerts and whatever. But for most people, it's a form of suffering. And to give you an idea of how much, my wife is a magistrate. If she had, let's say, a drug user, a persistent offender, and someone who keeps on stealing credit cards before her, and she says, well, I can put you in prison, but instead I'm going to curfew you. And I'm going to put a tag on you. And the conditions of your curfew are that you're going to be allowed out for only 1 hour a day, but you're not allowed to associate with any other human being when you go out, period. You're not to have any visitors in your house, period. The only people you're allowed to see are the people who are living with you in your house, period. And I will arrest you if you break that. So you are in lockdown. You are imprisoned in your home until further notice. I think that most people say, "Wow, that's a severe punishment." She was really mean to me. But actually, our whole nation's been asked to do just that. So it is suffering. And the consequences are huge. Let's imagine that you've got a family that's on the edge of mental health issues anyway. Even worse, you've got a child who's being systematically abused, physically, sexually. You've got a father that's beating up his wife every third day through drunkenness. All kinds of problems happening inside the house. And then you put them into lockdown. Well, this is the tragedy of it. All over New Zealand, I promise you, you talk to social workers that you know, you will discover the same thing as in this country. They are lying awake at night, sometimes with tears pouring down their faces, because they're worried sick about children who are vulnerable, who are being abused, might even be killed as a result of lockdown. They're worried about people who will take an overdose because they're so desperate they don't know who to turn to because of lockdown. So I'd say, lockdown can produce a kind of sort of collective psychosis in a nation. It can send an entire nation slightly over the top. So we all become slight caricatures of ourselves. It makes it, actually, let me ask a show of hands here. I'm going to ask a show of hands. I'm watching all of you here, hundreds of you. Give me a wave if, be honest, just be honest with me. If you have found yourself more emotional than usual, more likely to burst into tears or to be weeping in the last month, give me a wave. Okay, I rest my case. Okay, lockdown is making us emotional. It's destabilizing the nation collectively. If this call is any indication of that, 60% of people are being profoundly affected by lockdown. It's really important. And it's another reason why we have to be very careful not to enforce it any day longer than we have to.
Wow, great comment. With respect to, and I do want to get on to the intersection of faith in this as well, and really get some of your comments on this as well. But with respect to education, so we're in sort of this hybrid situation at the moment. We've got a lot of education folk on the call, a lot of teachers and principals and whatnot as well. And they're grappling at the moment with, obviously, we've sort of got a level 3 situation where essential workers kids can come to schools, or some schools are staffing up. We've got a lot of kids that are still at home. So we've got this weird situation. But how's education going to play out in your mind? Is it unscathed? Is it, how's it going to be affected by, I guess, by COVID is a fairly generic question, but.
Okay, so yeah, a couple of things. Firstly, we're getting organized. You have a situation where governments are producing national curricula online, which is a jolly good thing. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous that every single parent is having to generate their own educational materials in some countries, or each teacher.
I wholeheartedly agree with that.
What a waste of time. Just get the very best in class, the best videos to produce a particular lesson and let the whole nation learn together. So that's happening. Well, that's a gift for humankind, isn't it? That doesn't get old. I mean, everyone can use that. And by the way, a fantastic resource on, let's say, English literature that's produced in America can be used in New Zealand. So these are wonderful treasures, gifts for humankind. And I'm so excited about that. We're discovering, of course, that education is much more than learning. It's about social skills and things, which is why it's important to get kids back to school. But certainly, we are seeing profound changes on that. I agree. I would like to just turn a corner a little bit. I know that quite a few people on the call, not all, have a faith background as I do. Can I just share with you a couple of thoughts? And I'm very aware that there's all the text things going down. I promise you, I will try to answer every single question you've popped up, either before the session is over, or I'll do it in writing, and we'll pop it up on the website here. But can I just share a couple of thoughts about that? Is that okay?
Sure.
I've just been thinking about, what I've been thinking about is this. Thinking a lot about, can you see me and my slide at the moment?
Yep, we're good.
Okay. So what I've been thinking a lot about is St. Paul. St. Paul was locked up in prison. Despite his many prayers, he felt incredibly frustrated, angry with God, I think, and saying, why on earth am I in prison? My ministry is to travel. I should be preaching and teaching in churches, commissioning elders, and all the rest of it. And I think it took him quite a while to realize that actually he could not wait anymore. He had to just get on with it. And the only thing he could do was use the communication tool he had available to him, which was a pen and paper. And he started to write, or dictated to others to write, on very flimsy pieces of parchment, some messages, which were quite short. As a result of that, Paul became the world's most influential Christian in human history. He continues to be the most influential Christian today. He preaches more sermons than the whole of the rest of the Christian community put together, just about. If you think how many times a day Christians in the world will read something that Paul wrote. Paul, the greatest virtual discipler there's ever been. Paul, the first time warp apostle, because his words and ministry have transcended generations for 2,000 years. How extraordinary is that? And I think about that often, that Paul was frustrated, his prayers weren't answered. He had to be locked away with the key thrown away to bring him to a place where he was actually willing to hear what God was saying to him and to communicate it in the only way he could. Thank God for that. Or we would know very little of St. Paul, and the church would be so different today. So I think about, what do you think it is? 10 million, 100 million? We've got 2.4 billion people who say they're Christians around the world, 2.4 billion. I don't know how many church leaders there are, youth workers, evangelists, pastoral advisors, goodness knows what. I just think of those who are in full-time or part-time Christian ministry. And I wonder what is happening to them now that they too, like Paul, are forced into isolation, into a prison of their own with one or two companions, maybe not. And I believe that the church will see a most extraordinary explosion of effectiveness in terms of its ability to communicate the good news of Jesus Christ, the messages of the church, because as a direct consequence of isolation. And it is a huge opportunity. And I'm also very mindful of the impact on the heroes. The heroes are healthcare workers who go in every day looking after people, whether it's coronavirus or not. And I just want to encourage you, if you are one, that you are the aroma of Christ. Paul himself tells us we are the aroma of Christ, whether you feel like it or not. I remember looking after an elderly woman in a hospital bed with a view to trying to bring her home. I went to see her. I sat next to her and she took my hand and she smiled. We were alone in the room and she turned to me and she said, "But you, doctor, you know where you're going." I was slightly taken aback. We hadn't talked about anything really except her symptoms and her family. She said, "But you, doctor," holding my hand, she grabbed my hand, "you know where you're going." She picked up something. I said, yes. There were tears in her eyes and tears in mine. She picked up something. She said, "No one will talk to me." She said, "They whizzle by, they give me my medicines, but no one is talking to me about what I need to talk about, because I know where I'm going and I want to talk about where I'm going with you. You are the aroma of Christ." And Paul also tells us that in 2 Corinthians 1 verse 4, that the comfort we ourselves receive from Christ in troubles that we have helps us to provide comfort to others. It's in our moments of trial that we find the strength to help others in theirs. And, you know, I think about what's happening with coronavirus. I think about colleagues that have been under tremendous pressure in different countries, less so in New Zealand, I know, but it's still true, pastorally, especially for those in lockdown. We are called to be people of hope because our eyes are fixed, not on what is seen, but what is unseen. Why? Because of what is seen passes away, but what is unseen is eternal. So I just wanted to leave that thought with you. You know, there's more to life than coronavirus. There's more to life than life itself. Death itself is only a doorway from one very limited type of existence to life eternal.
So good. So good. That's an amazing thought. How do you, I guess, drilling into that, Dr. Patrick, how do you, I guess, intersect your faith with your work? Does the opportunity arise in all the forums, the global forums that you're in? Does the opportunity arise for you to, do people ask about questions of faith? I mean, the nature of the conversations that you're having at a global level are often about the future and the why and the what's happening and the bigger questions of life. And do you get asked the question as to, you know, why do you know so much? How are you this crazy seer that sees all these things? I mean, does it come up?
Yes. People often say, sort of, where do you get insights from? The answer is, I don't really know. I mean, I do what we're all futurists. You know, we all read the papers or we watch the news and we think, oh, I think this will probably, I wouldn't be surprised if this happens tomorrow. We all do it. We are programmed to think about the future. It is in human nature. It's part of planning. It's part of responsibility. But I just do it full time. In terms of faith, yes. I mean, if I'm in a session, as I often am, with taking people on a journey on the 6 phases of the future, which incidentally, someone said, you know, the 6 phases I talked about in my book, fast, urban, tribal, universal, radical, ethical, they are still valid. They're the ones which I've been talking about since 1998. They spell the word future, F-U-T-U-R-E. It's a cube. You can spin the cube. But yes, there's a hidden face, I guess, F-U-T-U-R-E, future, fast, urban, tribal, universal, radical, ethical, and there's a 6th phase, I guess, which is spiritual, which is what's within. And certainly, you know, it's no secret. I have a faith. You know, it's on my website. It's obvious if you look. You know, you can see the future of real estate, the future of management, the future of leadership, the future of government, the future of ethics, the future of manufacturing, and the future of the church and spirituality. So and as soon as you click on that, you come to the SHAP conference. Okay, so it's obvious. My world position. Anybody who reads my books, they'll see it. It's welded into the biography, or it becomes. It's clear that a spiritual worldview informs how I consider our longer term future. But we always have to be careful that we are serving our client's agenda, not our own. So if a client's asking me to talk about mobile banking, they're going to get mobile banking. They're not going to get me talking about keeping your eyes fixed on Jesus.
Yeah, that's a good point. Hey, I am conscious the time is 9 o'clock and we do want to stick to time. And so we have, you are, but Dr. Patrick, you can stay there for a moment. If you do need to drop off the call, we understand. And so we are, in terms of officially gonna, I will keep the call open, but if you do need to drop off the call, we understand. We have kept to an hour and that's been amazing. There have been a whole bunch of questions, so you are free to go.
Yeah.
And there have been some great questions come up.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dr.
What I'd like to do is kind of a sort of a speed test and see how many of these questions I can answer per minute. Okay, how about that? We'll try and roar our way down some of these things that have been put up on the chat screen. Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Give it a go. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So let me just come back to.
Help us sing out to me.
All right. I'm seeing. So cool. Love the grass. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's very nice. Lovely, lovely comments. Okay. I've done the split on the comments. What advice would you give to large corporations in New Zealand to help jumpstart the economy as we ease lockdown? I think my advice to large corporations is breathe confidence, common sense, courage, conviction, vision. It's all about morale. It's about communicating every day. If you're a CEO, you need to be doing a Zoom call probably every 2 days to your workforce. Every morning, sort of 8:45 in the morning, just for 15 minutes. Just it's reassuring the fact that you're here, You're not sick, you're not dying, you're not afraid. Let's rebuild this business. And this is how we're going to do it. So updates, information, confidence, and the spirit of hope. That's the biggest thing of all. It's all to do with morale. So, okay. How do you recommend we stay ahead of the speed up in technology? Well, it depends what particular business you're in or industry you're in. I would say if you are an employee, if you're an ordinary person, I'd say pick one thing. So if you are someone who is in the workplace and you work in an office, here's your instruction for today. Go and look at one thing. Do one thing. Go and look at your own LinkedIn page, and for goodness sake, make sure it's up to date and it really reflects who you are, and and spend some good time on it. Forget everything else. Just get your LinkedIn page right. Why? Because it's the main method of recruitment for the next decade. Okay, so that's just one example. Another example is, for goodness sake, make sure that you know how to use Zoom, because it is, and to use it properly so you don't get hacked. Okay, go on the website, get yourself registered. Look, I don't have any shares in Zoom. I've got no commercial interest in whatsoever. I'm just saying it's a useful platform. It's the dominant one as far as I'm concerned, because it's stable, easy to use, it's free, or it costs almost nothing. But I would recommend you do get a prescription, a proper subscription, because then you can have proper features like being able to run a call for 100 people, or for doing it for more than 40 minutes. Do I think that how much impact will countries around the world that have not taken an elimination approach have on the timeline of return to normal on countries like New Zealand? Well, I've said, look, I couldn't care less whether a country like Zimbabwe has an elimination approach or not. Sadly, my wife and I have worked a lot in Zimbabwe through the Ministry of Asset, Aids Care, Education and Training. And I can tell you that I think it was the last time we were there, we drove on a very bumpy road up through the bush, trying not to turn the vehicle over and crash. And we passed people carrying sick relatives on donkeys. We didn't have the space to take them. And they were walking on donkeys, with their sick relatives, to a clinic that was about 40 kilometers away. When we got to the clinic, it was a nice cluster of well-maintained buildings, a beautifully trained nurse with all her protocols for treatment for everything on the wall. And she was treating all conditions for all people. The only thing is she had nothing. In her medicine cabinet, all she had was medicines for people who had schizophrenia and epilepsy. Nothing else, nothing else, nothing else. So please don't tell me that we have this fantasy that somehow Zimbabwe will be able to manage its way through the pandemic of coronavirus. Of course it won't. But Zimbabwe will come through it earlier than New Zealand, because Zimbabweans' population will be significantly immune very quickly. Do you think COVID-19 was genetically engineered in a Wuhan P4 laboratory? I was asked the same question about HIV 32 years ago. Could HIV have been genetically engineered? Now, I was able to say at that time that no, it could not have been, because we knew that HIV had been around, actually hidden, since the 1950s. We could work it out retrospectively. It is worrying that we now have the technology to create viruses which are much more deadly than coronavirus. It is worrying that such viruses exist in the germ warfare laboratories of many of the world's largest nations. So it is absolutely certain that in the UK, in Portland Down, in the United States, in Russia, in China, in India, all kinds of work is going on all the time on mutant viruses. It has to, because governments have to protect themselves against the possibility that a biotech weapon might fall into the hands of a terrorist group, or might indeed be made. The trouble is, you only need a lab the size of a porta cabin now to make a mutant virus. That is the really shocking thing about the genetic revolution. So, of course, it is right to ask the question about whether this particular virus was one that had some assistance in translation from animal to human, from human beings, as part of some terrible accident. It's possible. I have no idea at all. All I'm saying is such viruses could emerge at any time in any nation with biotech facilities, and indeed, even in nations that simply have small groups of biotech maniacs working in small laboratories doing their own thing and trying to solve problems of the world and actually inadvertently releasing viruses. So I have no idea. I can't answer that question, but I'm just saying we're in dangerous times with virus technology. Will it be something to get annual vaccines for? We might have to have annual vaccines against COVID. Yes, a bit like ordinary flu. People talk about the new normal. Yeah, I don't exaggerate, this permanent change and no one's going to fly on planes again. I don't believe it, to be honest. I think the life will return relatively quickly to normal, whatever normal is for different people. You'll have people who are continually terrified and neurotic, who probably won't go on a plane for the rest of their lives, maybe. You have others that have a pretty much common sense type of view, who will muddle their way along, and they will gradually get comfortable with, going to a restaurant when they've seen evidence that the government's correct, that they've controlled it and all the rest of it. But you'll see others that are gung-ho, foolhardy, and campaigning even, outside government offices for lockdown to be eased at times when it would be really dangerous. Do you see an economic disparity between those who have immunity and those that don't? Could we see people choosing to infect themselves? Oh yes, choosing to put themselves at risk. Absolutely. In fact, we will all be commanded to, I think. I've said this before. And if you're not in a high risk group, then this is a tunnel you have to walk through with courage. Those who are not in high risk groups, so long as the NHS the National Health Service in your country can cope with the speed of new infections and the 10% who will need hospital care and the 5% who land up in intensive care, then we can allow the virus to spread. We can't hide in nuclear bunkers for the next 20 or 30 years, hoping somehow that we will be permanently protected against COVID-19. Can we rewatch this after the live feed? Yes, of course you can. Do you think the current situation will change the 5-day working week? Well, I don't know what the 5-day working week is, because I don't seem to work one. I don't think I've worked one since about the age of 20. Anyone who's working shifts doesn't work it. Any mum doesn't work it. Anyone who's breastfeeding a child doesn't work it. I mean, what is the 5-day working week? It's a fantastical idea, but for most people, it doesn't really exist. And the fusion between home life, work life, these things are becoming blurred. They will continue to get blurred. Having said that, I think there's a truth here, which is that for our mental health, we do need to put boundaries. So I'm a futurist. I live in the future, which is why I go offline so often. I really do want to go offline. And if you don't believe me, my wife and I were so keen to go offline that we actually sailed all the way across the Atlantic just a few weeks ago, before lockdown actually. For 16 and a half days, we were totally off grid. It was the most wonderful, wonderful experience, just looking up into the night sky and seeing this amazing creation that our Lord made, and just being caught up in the moment rather than having to live in the future or being dragged back to the past or being constantly distracted by all kinds of nonsenses that fill our brains normally. Very important to take time out. Do you think the current, seeing the human life is so vulnerable, what message or advice would you give to people who struggle with anxiety, fears, and mental health? There has to be something settling or reassuring. Just think of my students. I think that's difficult. And I think that I would encourage, the first thing I would do is encourage students to take hold of their own future. We often feel out of control in this kind of situation, and that compounds fear. I think it's very important for people to identify the things which they can control, that they want to do, that they want to give their lives to. We have a lot of freedom, actually. Even in lockdown, we have a lot of freedom. Say, okay, so who do you want to see? Who would you like to spend some time with? Why don't you have a meal with them on Zoom? Why don't you call them now? Why don't you set up a Zoom meeting with all of your grandchildren? Why don't you do some homeschooling with some of the children and actually find a new way of relating to them? I'm just saying, let's consider what it is that you want to do. This is the time to do your life work, write a book or record your biography, or do some painting, helping people to focus on things which they themselves will find helpful. Your book talked about the 6 phases of the future: fast, universal. It's actually fast, urban, tribal, universal, radical, ethical. Fast, urban, tribal, universal, radical, ethical. 6 phases of the future. Do you think any 1 or 2 should feature more in recovery phase post-crisis? Well, I've always said there's 2 ways to view the world, and I'm sorry I haven't got the cube. but you can view it as a fast urban universal world. Speed of change, wildcard risks like coronavirus, urban demographics, healthcare, fashions, fads, emerging markets, and universal globalization of disease, amongst other things. Or you see it as a world which is very radical in thinking, very tribal, very tight and together, and very ethical. You may not like people's ethics that they have, but they feel that they're ethical. They're driven by passion. And there's a conflict between these two versions of the world. And actually, this is a time when some people are becoming even more radical in their thinking at home, even more tribal through social media, and even more ethical. Let's say they're considering what they're doing. So in the UK, meat sales are falling through the floor much more rapidly than we would have expected in this quarter, because people are being more thoughtful about what they eat. They're becoming more tribal, radical, and ethical at home. What will happen post coronavirus? I think we'll be back to a whole load more fast, a whole load more universal, and a whole load more urban. That is to say, people traveling a lot, wanting experiences, wanting to explore, and wanting to meet each other as well. Okay, do you think this could get us closer to a universal basic income? That's a political question. The answer is yes, in some nations, because of what's happening. Yeah, I agree with that. Will we see deregulation within the finance industry as a result of the changes? No, not because of a result of the coronavirus. We will see deregulation in some parts because it was over-regulated as a result of the last economic crisis, and to the point where banks have become unprofitable in some countries. And there's nothing worse than having unprofitable banks. If they're unprofitable, people don't put money in. If they don't put money in, banks don't grow, and they can't attract talent. So we have to have a decent conversation about our attitude towards banks. Every country needs strong banks. Banks are as vital to the health of Zimbabwe as healthcare and schools. Okay. Preach, come on. That is so great. Loving it. Good. Thank you. Very interesting. Do you think COVID-19 will cause greater income and wealth inequality in first world countries? It already has. Yes. COVID-19 is causing a massive migration of wealth from some people to others. So it's not killing off wealth necessarily. Some companies are doing extraordinarily well, especially anybody delivering things to people at home, like Amazon. Others are doing very, very badly, like the hospitality industry, hotels, restaurants, airlines, and things. And those with cash will be the real winners. So people who have accumulated cash mountains, thinking that there might be big risks coming. A friend of mine is worth $1 billion, and he's been really worried about Armageddon from Brexit, uncontrolled, chaotic Brexit. I've not been worried. I've always been fairly relaxed about it, and my predictions have turned out to be correct over the last few years with regard to the impact on the British economy. But nevertheless, he'd cashed out. So he's been sitting on this big mountain of cash. Oh my goodness, what opportunities now for someone like him to go in and help companies. It's not doing aggressive raids and terrible, nasty things. It's saying, hey, you're a fantastic leadership team. I think your products are amazing. You change the world in amazing ways. I love your values. You've got fantastic ideas. It's tragic. You run out of cash. You're about to go bust. What a waste of everything. Look, let me come in alongside you. Yes, that's the good news. The bad news is I'm going to need a big slice of the company because it's almost worthless at the moment. But if you can come to some view, let's resurrect this company, get it back on them, and I will own 40%. That's what a venture capitalist might say. So yes, huge wealth will have moved in that moment from the people who sweated their lives over that company to a new investor who's rescued them. Big issues. People with ASD would thrive within this new. I wonder if people with ASD would thrive with this new way of living. I can't really comment on that. What will industry look like, and what does that mean for our schools and what we teach? Industry, there's nothing new here. Look at all the trends that are in my book, The Future of Almost Everything. They will remain. The increasing robotization, industrialization, the Internet of Things, big data, automation, predictive analytics. So we can predict which piece of equipment in your factory fails 3 weeks before it goes wrong. All of that. It's just being accelerated by COVID, that's all. How quickly do you expect international travel to return to normal? A long time. I think January 2020, very earliest, and it will be patchy. If you've got a nation like Uganda that's come through and out the other side, the flights between Uganda and another nation like Nigeria that's also come through and out the side, they'll be back to normal. But flights between, say, I don't know, Germany and Turkey, well, that's another question. Or flights between Turkey and New Zealand. Education, what skills will be the most important for a learner moving into the future? Same curriculum or different? Do we need to drive new key competencies or the same? You know what? I say, don't get too panicked. The world isn't all COVID-19. There's life beyond coronavirus. We are going to survive and thrive, okay? Educational skills, what is the most important educational skill in the whole world? It's teaching people how to learn. It's teaching people to be intensely curious about everything for the rest of their lives, always asking questions, hungry to learn, and knowing how to learn, stretching people so they learn the skills of being able to use their knowledge, to communicate, to be able to write, for instance, to be able to create things, to be able to communicate well using these kinds of formats and others. These are key things. I don't think these things are changing. Okay, there's a whole section on my website called The Future of Education, globalchange.com. Go and have a look at it. I put a whole load of videos up there on the future of business schools, the future of MBA programs, the future of college education. Yeah, there's a whole stack of stuff, really important trends. I'm not going to bother with it all here because I don't think it's changed because of COVID. Okay, go and look at the website, globalchange.com, globalchange.com. It's all free. What's your prediction for the industries that are social by their nature? As I said, terrible. Hospitality and leisure. It's going to be patchy though. You know, if New Zealand has virtually no cases, then the internal market for people going to have a weekend down in Wellington is going to be normal. Okay, go and enjoy yourselves. And you will be back to normal relatively quickly. It's just the international travelers coming in that you'll be a bit worried about. Okay, so curriculum, key competencies, managing yourself is a very valuable skill right now. Yeah, I agree, absolutely. What would you recommend for any politicians who are currently trying to keep areas of our economy going? It's all about common sense, exuding confidence, showing you have a plan, and not being panicked or pressured, conveying with conviction and passion and vision that there is a future and how we will get there. That's the most important thing. Okay. These are nice comments. Thank you. One thing you could do was the only. Okay. As an essential worker in child protection, it's very rough. Yeah, it is rough. But my hope in Jesus keeps me focused. You know, we need to just sort of be prayerful and just, you know, the most important thing, we just need huge wisdom. You know, think, okay, today, what is the one phone call or Zoom call or whatever I can do that could really make a difference? The rest is rubbish. Actually, it's an amazing principle. 80% of the impact of your life, your work, your ministry, your parenting comes from probably 20% of what you do. We call it the 80-20 rule. It's a fantastically efficient process. Jesus knew it too. He had 70 disciples, but he chose 12. Out of the 12, he had 3. Out of 3, he had one special one, John. Actually, he was alive for 33 years, but actually he only had a public ministry for 3 of them. You see what I'm saying here? Focus on what really matters. If Jesus could produce almost the entire impact of his ministry from 3 out of his 12 disciples, of whom one of him completely let him down, in just 3 years out of 33 years, then just consider what you can do with your life by focusing on the 1 or 2 things that really, really matter each day. And in this particular area of lockdown, it could be something as simple as writing a card, a physical card with a note of encouragement to someone you think is experiencing mental health issues, and maybe going round to their house and pushing it through the front door. Okay, let's hope you're not pushing COVID through the front door at the same time, but just little things. Okay, I'm really interested. 3 tips for small businesses to focus on for recovery. Cash, Okay, cash number one. Without cash, you're doomed. Okay, so secure your cash position, ruthlessly make whatever cuts you need, and then go twice as deep as you think you need, because there's nothing worse. Cash kills businesses. Make sure that your cash position is secure. Talk to your staff early and with compassion about what you need to do in order to make the business survive. Make very, very drastic economies where you need to. Don't be afraid to do that. And actually, cash, cash, and cash are the first three things you need to look at regarding small businesses to focus on recovery. And when you've done that, then you need to turn to the things that don't cost anything, like using Zoom for your customers, keeping in touch with people, going the extra mile, doing things for a fraction of your normal price. Forget about normal pricing. You're just keeping the relationships going. You're doing favors all over the place. We're in this together. Why have the share markets rebounded too early? I'm not going to get into speculations about markets. All I'd say is don't believe markets. Markets are not the truth, just as watching CNN or BBC News videos is not the truth. It's a version of the truth. What are your thoughts about how I think minorities are succumbing more to the virus? Okay, I'm going to make a prediction that we will discover that there are all kinds of genes which are protective against coronavirus. We don't know which ones, but when we do, it'll help us to design treatments. And some of these genes may be more common in certain ethnic groups, certain nations than in others. That is absolutely inevitable. I think we'll find that there are other factors going on as well. For instance, in the US, you have a third of the population with no access to healthcare. If one of those people gets sick and has a cough, they are at their wits' end. The last thing they want to do is go to hospital. We've had people who are saying, please don't put me on a ventilator because my family will be bankrupted. So in that situation, of course, you're going to have a population that has worse outcomes health-wise than people who are, let's say, fully insured. It's absolutely inevitable. And unfortunately, in the US, a much higher proportion of the uninsured are from ethnic minority groups. So we need to be aware of all of these things operating. Are there roles in the workforce? The ethnic minority thing, maybe not the case in New Zealand. Have a look. You see, I think it's to do with access to healthcare and economic status and so on. Are roles in the workforce that will become obsolete and not return? What kind of roles we will need to retrain for? Read my book, The Future of Almost Everything. As I've said, the fundamental trends are not changed. It's only the timings. So if you're saying, are there certain skills that I should be investing in for the next 10 years? You need to invest in them right now for the next 3. Are there certain industries which won't be around so much in the next 5 years? Some of those won't be around next year, okay? So just focus on the really big things, not on all the carnage that's in the media, and you'll have a good guide to the future. Why are children's immune systems seemingly more resistant? Well, they're not necessarily more resistant. Actually, it's that they're less active. We know that people who have thick medical notes have immune systems which are just hyper angry all the time. Okay, they're looking for the next crisis to fight. And the immune system, when it's aggressive like that, it overreacts to coronavirus. So people, it doesn't matter what age, they go through the same sort of mild thing, either no symptoms or slight symptoms, first 6, 7, 8 days, no problem. Then this feels slightly better. Think, oh, this is good. I shall go out in the garden tomorrow. And then suddenly, wham! What happens is their immune system starts to wake up and go berserk. And then you get toxic shock, in the immune system causing all kinds of damage and carnage to multiple systems across the body. And you land up in intensive care pretty fast. So children who have immune systems which have never been super primed like this react gently to the virus. They deal with it in a sensible manner and it's kicked out. So that appears to be something that's very, very important. How do you explain peer-reviewed published research in 2018 on synthetic coronavirus from Munich? Look, we're back to the same again. I haven't seen that piece of research. I'm just saying, again, there's nothing new about coronaviruses. That's number one. Number two, you can have a particular virus. I mean, HIV, for instance, there are several strains of it. It's perfectly plausible to think that HIV could have jumped from animals into humans more than once. Maybe the first 2 or 3 times it never made it, and the humans died of something else before they transmitted it. We just don't know. All we know is coronaviruses exist widely in the animal community. They mutate rapidly, and they jump easily. So I'm not terribly fussed whether someone says, oh, there was a coronavirus in 2017 in Wuhan or 2001. Who cares? It doesn't matter. It doesn't actually prove anything. Okay, as we develop our immune system, will we reach a stage where we're so developed and advanced that the simple virus will return to cause huge numbers of dying? We are too advanced. Well, look, I think the most important thing is population size. In my book, The Future of Almost Everything, I described that I'm now expecting world population to peak at around 11.5 billion in the year 2065. That's really shocking. You see, when Spanish flu happened in 1918, 1919, that virus spread globally in just a year, 18 months. And it was then over. It burnt its way out. There was nowhere else for it to go. The world had become more or less resistant to it without any lockdowns or anything terribly much, being very successful. And that was in the age of the horse and cart. That was in most of the world, that was in the age of the donkey and people walking on foot. There weren't any planes. This was the age of sea travel. So shocking that it spread so fast globally. But the point is this, there were 30 to 40 million people died out of a population then of only 2.3 billion. We were talking about, by 2065, 11.5 billion people. And of course, every time you offer a virus another billion people to infect, it's more likely to mutate again. So you can see that the risks of these kinds of events are increasing exponentially, especially as we cut down rainforests. We are knocking up against wild populations of animals all the time, living much closer to them than perhaps is healthy, causing all kinds of opportunities for transmission between species. When do you think how long do you think social distancing will last? I can't comment on that because it depends on your town, district, neighborhood, community, nation. When will it be safe for people to shake hands again? Well, in much of New Zealand, probably quite soon, but that's a question for your government. How does a country like New Zealand operate in a global world while waiting for a vaccine and shutting its borders? Well, I think I've already answered that. It's being sensible, gradual reopening. You can't lock down the whole nation, nor do you need to, for the whole of the human existence of New Zealand. You can't. Do you think China will be expected or compelled to repay reparation? No, I don't. I think that people will recognize that these things happen. And even in America, we've seen examples just recently where healthcare workers have been told to shut up by the White House when they're trying to tell the nation what's going on. So please, America, can't point the finger. Please don't point the finger at China. These things happen. Nations get terrified. Governments get terrified about dissemination of alarming information. They say this is wartime. We need to lock these things down, prevent this kind of sensationalist nonsense. So, but will it change the attitude of respect towards China by some nations? Yes, it's been a huge brand damage to China, huge brand damage. And China will do an awful lot to try and repair that, you can be sure, just as they tried to do after SARS, and they went a long way after that. It's just very unfortunate that, that these things have happened. Quite honestly, I don't think it would have altered the final outcome. You see, I don't think China would have been able to get control. You see, for the first nation, things just happen more quickly than you realize. Even in the UK, for goodness sake, you know, I mean, in the UK, we had plenty of warning, but even we were massively caught out. I mean, I'm supposed to be a futurist. I saw it coming. In mid-January, I was wondering whether, you know, a family holiday we planned for the end of March was going to happen. I hoped that it would, but I thought it probably wouldn't happen in April. Wow, it all came 6 weeks earlier than I thought. So, yeah, I remember often the issue of the future is not what's going to happen. It's obvious. It's timing. And I was out by timing. I could see the future happening. It was obvious. We were going to have a global pandemic of coronavirus, but I was wrong about speed. I was wrong about the speed of lockdown being needed and so on. So if that's the case for nations that have been watching every single day catastrophes unfold in places like Italy, then we need to have some compassion for the leadership of China in a country of 1 billion people and over that, who were hit by a virus that nobody knew anything about before, really. So let's not knock China too much. It's hard to run countries. As Christians, we're told to pray for those in authority, not slag them off all the time. Those 5G towers, conspiracy theories, all this kind of stuff. There's a whole load of nonsense. Oh dear. When HIV was at its peak in terms of spread in the early 1990s, one of the leading newspapers, intellectual newspapers in Britain, the Sunday Times, kept on carrying big headlines saying HIV does not cause AIDS. I was furious because I saw it was killing people. And there was a kind of sort of psychotic delusion. I went to see the editor, Andrew O'Neill, who is still a famous broadcaster, who was in sole control, really, of the editorial content of the Times at that point. And I sat in his office. I said, do you really believe that? And the trouble was, he did. And you know what? No end of research papers I presented to him would convince him otherwise. He said it was a fantasy. HIV did not cause AIDS. Oh, my goodness. Well, we're back there again with 5G towers now, except it's not the Sunday Times. It's other broadcasters and things. Broadcasting rubbish. There will always be conspiracy theories. It is often said that evil is only allowed to arise when good people remain silent. I would say conspiracy theories are only allowed to spread when sensible people keep their mouths shut. If you are fed up with conspiracy theories, you have a responsibility, my friend, to take them on, to flack people who put them out, to knock them down, to use your Facebook account, Twitter, and every other means you can to promote the truth. Okay, how are we doing for time? Well, we're at 10:30. We've still got 233 people. I have no idea why you're still on the call, but you are. I love your library. What proportion of the books behind you have you written? Oh, every single one. No, I've only written 17. But I love books. You see, people say all kinds of nonsense about the future. They say books won't last. No one likes books. Children's books are rocketing in sales. Why? Because of the sheer physicality of it. You know, it's something lovely about opening a book and turning the pages, smelling it. It's fantastic. Kindle sales flat. Sales of electronic books flat. You know, that's what physicality is wonderful. Okay. What do you think of radical thinking like Elon Musk, who says we need to become an interplanetary species? Well, okay. If this is to help humankind to survive, it's a pretty strange way to help humankind to survive, because what he's saying is the whole world may become extinct, so we'll repopulate the world from 40 people on Mars. Okay. Look, I think there are other ways we can deal with this by being sensible, investing in antiviral technology, and so on. I'm not saying we shouldn't try to go to Mars. I think it's interesting, but let's not spend too much money on it. Okay, do you think we will still be waiting for Jesus to return in 2065? You know what? I don't care. Look, I want you to understand what I'm saying here. Listen, I'm a simple kind of soul. I won't be around in 2065. I'll be with, hopefully, with the Lord in heaven by then, if he'll have me in there, okay, by his grace, not because of anything I've done. But listen, one thing I know is this: I'm a simple soul, and it's been helped by me looking after people dying of cancer. I know that you can't say, oh, well, you know, the Lord's going to come back in 2065. You have to live for now. We're told to live each day as if it lasts. Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will take care of itself. He said, what's the point of storing up grain in your barns and then you find that you die tomorrow? He's not saying being irresponsible. What he's saying is, listen, we can wear ourselves out thinking about futures that may or may not happen. The most important thing is to be responsible about now. What are the decisions I need to take now that will keep me in a good position to live tomorrow? And that means, yes, it does mean some future thinking. If you're a farmer, idiotic to eat all your own grain, so you have nothing left to plant with the following year. We need to be sensible, responsible, take reasonable decisions, but at the end of the day, live every day as a precious gift from God, because it ain't coming back again. Okay, you just got today. You may be meeting him tonight. Who knows? So the big question is, how long are you going to live? Not how long is the world going to live before the Lord Jesus comes back. My question to you is, whoever you are, how long do you think you've got? Someone once said to me, why did you write 3 books in a year? I said, I didn't know I'm going to be around next year. Did you? Do you know you're going to be around next year? We need to do what we've been told to do. We need to follow what we've been told to follow. We need to grab the destiny, which is our God-given purpose here on earth, and make the difference we're called to be with every breath of our being, and let the Lord take care of when he's coming back, okay? Do you think the global church, and particularly Christians, will pray in the recovery process from COVID? The church has always been there. The church in the UK is the biggest social enterprise. It provides more collectively the people who belong to the church. We've measured it. presented it to the government, to number 10 Downing Street, to the Prime Minister. The church delivers more social care than any other group in our society for free to government. Will have a vital role to play in recovery, and I'm sure the same will be the case in New Zealand. Something I'm really concerned about is the effect, both emotionally and practically. Okay, if you like, social distancing hangover and anxiety and loneliness, lack of empathy. How can we fight these effects, which affect the invisibly vulnerable the most? Well, I think we fight it by aiming to be normal ourselves. Okay, focusing each day on things which bring us to normality. Let me give you a personal example. For 5 weeks now, we've been in lockdown. For 4 weeks, I hadn't been out in the car. I haven't been more than a mile from my home, just walking in circles. Okay, each day, same circle. One day I said to Sheila, I'm going mad. I'm just going bonkers. I can't bear this anymore. I have to go in the car. Now, in fairness, the government says you're allowed to drive for 30 minutes in either direction to get to your walk. The government says you can rest in the middle of your walk so long as your rest is not longer than the walk. Okay. But did I go in the car? No. I said to Sheila, for my own sanity, I think I just can't. We need to get in the car. It's a sunny day. Let's go and drive somewhere. Let's go for a big long walk. We'll sit in some field that's completely deserted in some great wilderness and have a picnic. And then let's drive back. Do you know what? I think that was the biggest thing I could possibly do for my own health and well-being. So I think we just need to be sensible. Walk ourselves in a sensible way, live ourselves in a sensible way, and then hopefully we will be a sensible and encouraging and stabilizing effect on those around us. From a relatively non-educated background, how do we distinguish between the conspiracy theories and the truth? Easy. Go to my website. Globalchange.com is where you will find the truth about COVID-19. Globalchange.com. Go to the World Health Organization website, and there you will find as good a version of the truth as you'll find anywhere on the planet. WHO. Okay, thoughts on face masks in public? Very important. Not for everybody, and it depends on the stage. But the reason that it looks like it will be important for some countries in some phases is because you don't know if you're carrying the virus or not. 25% of humanity gets infected, never has any symptoms, but they're blasting it out every time they cough, every time they sneeze, and every time they speak. My screen, I'm sorry to say this, I'm going to need to wipe my screen. You know why? Because for the last hour, I've been spraying my screen with protein. It's tiny droplets of protein, and I've been filling the whole room with a cloud of aerosol cloud. Anybody who comes into this room at the moment, because I've been speaking so much, anyone that comes into this room at the moment, if I'm carrying COVID, will get COVID. Quite likely, we'll get the virus that causes COVID-19. Why? Because we're spraying. Now, the most effective way to prevent that is this. If I just do that, my screen won't need cleaning. So if my screen won't need cleaning, your glasses won't need cleaning, your nose won't need cleaning, and you won't need to swill your mouth out with mouthwash every 2.5 seconds when you're standing in front of me. So common sense tells us that wearing masks is very, very important if you are going to be near lots of people, some of whom could be infected. It's something we do to protect others. Also, it may protect us, because if someone is speaking at us, those viruses could land on the mask instead of on our mouth or nose. But it won't stop the spray coming out around the edges of your mask unless you've got a very sophisticated one. Don't use those, please. There aren't enough to go around in the world. Your doctors and nurses need them, okay? Why? Oh, WHO full of nonsense. Tedros said Wuhan flu can't be transmitted between people that don't close borders. They're wrong, then lost their chance. Well, okay. I'm not going to defend every statement WHO has made. I'm just saying that you will find on the World Health Organization website a pretty good digest of what is currently known about medical research on coronavirus, properly referenced with scientific journals. That's what you need to stick to. Okay, we come to the end of questions.
Brilliant, brilliant, amazing.
Wow, I don't think I've seen anybody ever do that. And
Yeah.
short amount of time you've done that.
And we've still got 200 people on the call.
I know.
And
What do we do with them?
on YouTube as well. So amazing.
Oh my word.
Yeah.
What have I left out? You had had a fantastic set of questions. I haven't got them in front of me. You had a fantastic set of questions. I think the whole
you
load
covered, in your initial comments, I think in your slides, you managed to cover off a lot of the questions that we had. And I think it was really good to, again, scratch where people are itching and to cover off. I just want to say thanks. That's such a
brilliant.
That's such a broad range of topics that you've covered in an hour and 42 minutes. And I just felt to say, Dr. Patrick, what a blessing you are to the body of Christ. I really want to honor you for what you do. I know you're in a lot of really significant, influential environments. And, you know, we really want to say thanks just on behalf of Equippers Church and Pastor Sam and the team. And just, you know, what a blessing you've been to us over the last couple of years. But also, you know, we pray this isn't the last time we get to talk. And when our borders open up, you're welcome to come back to our country again. And,
I only go where I'm invited.
Do some sailing.
Absolute blast to be with you guys. It was just, it was life-changing for us, actually. It really was. It was life-changing for Sheila and myself. I don't use those words lightly. It was an absolute privilege to be with you, to see what God's doing.
Something.
Oh, come back, not now.
Oh, it's just, is it? Hey, something's frozen there. Are you there, Dr. Patrick? I think something's frozen. Jake, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still there. I think everyone's still there. I think he's frozen at his end.
Yeah, frozen. Well, thanks for everyone for joining us. By the way, just Jake, do you want to talk about the different gatherings we've got going on?
Yeah, so again, if you continue to, there's the marketplace gatherings, the education gatherings, and the health gatherings. And again, if you will make a copy of the chat.
From
Sorry,
one,
Dr. Patrick, you there?
Call to another.
Oh, we've got you back now.
Hi, sorry about that. Oops.
Right. We've got you back.
Well,
we were just continuing to sing your praises, really. What we will do, I just thought, if you are still on the call, again, if you keep connected to our different marketplace and health and education gatherings, what we'll try and do is to make, again, Dr. Patrick's resources available. I know some of us have his books from a couple of years ago, and he's referenced them a lot, and a lot of the answers to your questions are in those books as well. So we will, if you drop your email into this into the chat, we'll make a record of the chat as well, and I'll leave you details there as well, and we'll make sure those resources are available and you know where to access them as well. Many of you asked if there's a recording of tonight. Yes, there has been a recording, and so we will produce that recording again. So just make sure you're connected to the different environments that we're connected to. Leave your email address there, and we will do that. Dr. Patrick, you still with us?
Yeah, I'm just taking a good look at everybody. My call dropped out, but because I don't believe in technology, we had two of everything running. So, oh, you're over here. Sorry.
So Dr. Patrick is on Wi-Fi and on 4G on two separate screens, just in the event that this actually might happen, which it did.
Brilliant.
Okay, so let me unmute here. Oops, no, I need to go here.
Oops, sorry. That's better. So, yeah, it's been great to be with you. Oh, sorry. Ouch. That's better. So it's been great to be with you, and look forward to working with you again.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much again.
Can we show our appreciation? Hands up on screens. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful, Dr. Patrick. Thank you so much again. What a massive blessing.
And thanks to your team for putting it together, as usual, unbelievably professional in every way.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
And big thanks to the doers as well, Ravi and the team for bringing the dots together. Yeah.
Thanks,
Ravi. Bless you on. Have a good day.
Have a
See
good
you on
night,
Sunday.
See you later.